Welcome, friends of the Greasy Shop Rag. Today we're going to take a look at a Husqvarna 128LD string trimmer that happens to have a sidewalk edger attachment on it. The customer complaint is that it only runs on half choke. Well, we're going to fire this thing up and verify that, but before we do that, we're going to just take a couple quick looks. The air filter isn't terrible. You want to make sure there isn't any pond scum in the fuel tank. Looks like it should run on that. Let's see if it starts. So clearly we have some fuel related issues here. We'll start by dumping out the fuel tank and looking a little deeper inside. Fuel looked fine. We're going to pull the carburetor off and look in there too. So there's two nuts that hold this air filter housing in place. And once them two nuts are off and that housing's gone, that carburetor is loose. So you should be able to pop it right off there. You just have to remove the throttle cable and the two fuel lines. And we're just going to pry them off with a scrunch. Take note of which line went on which fitting on the carb, because you can't cross the filter and a return line or it just won't work. Alright, this plate that we're pulling off of here is the metering diaphragm plate or cover. And that black gasket looking piece is the metering diaphragm. This piece is designed to move up and down inside that chamber and push on the needle lever, alright, or the metering lever. And when it pushes on that lever, it raises the needle out of its seat and allows fuel to flow into the chamber, or it stops the flow of fuel. So when that diaphragm gets stiff and that function can't work the way it's supposed to, the machine won't run right, or it'll constantly flood, or it'll never get fuel. So that metering diaphragm being soft and supple is pretty important. Now, because I'm going to put this in the ultrasonic cleaner, I want to remove the high and the low speed jets out of here. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just counting how many turns it takes to gently seat those needles, so that when I put them back in, I can back them out the same amount of turns and be somewhat close to where we just had it running. I'm also in the habit of laying these things on the bench in order. So the high-speed jet is sitting higher on the pile in front of me. The low-speed jet would be the closer one to me. High and low. Here's our gaskets, part of our kit. I mean, this is pretty easy stuff. All you got to do is put the new gasket of the same style in place of the old gasket. That one doesn't match up. All the little holes and whatever. They don't line up with the holes in the carburetor. They give you a couple different choices here. The kit must cover several models of carburetors. If you like puzzles, you'll like doing this. When you put this back together, just make sure that everything is properly lined up. I've seen carburetors come through that people claim, well, I just put a kit in it. Yeah, well, the gasket kind of shimmied off to one side before you snapped it together and screwed it down, and that's why it doesn't run right. Alright, now we're back to our metering lever side. You'll see that the metering lever is still in place. Base gasket always goes down first. Metering gasket on top of it, or metering diaphragm. And then the metering diaphragm cover plate. Again, make sure everything's lined up properly. Kind of fighting that screw, ain't I? Just snug these screws down decent. You don't have to crank on them. They're small screws. But you do want them tight so that the carburetor is sealed. So you'll see that our low speed jet, the one that was closest to me and lowest in the pile, is going in the low speed hole. How do I know that's the low speed hole? Because it's always the one closest to the engine. And if you look at the choke lever, you'll see that the choke lever is on this side of the carburetor, where the high speed jet's going to go. Now I just count the turns out. Must have been 2.5 or something like that. And it doesn't have to be anywhere close to exact. If you can get the things to start, you can quickly adjust the screws to a point where it'll stay running. Now we're pushing our fuel lines back on. Our return line is almost always the one closest to the primer bulb, and that return line is not the one with the filter on it. Speaking of filters, we're going to put a new one on here. The fuel line itself feels fine. We're not going to bother replacing that. Now our throttle linkage is going back on. There's a little Z bend in the end of the cable. You just got to drop it into the hole on the linkage on the carb. That cover will only go on when the choke is turned straight out like this. There's a hole in the cover that it passes through. And we'll get this thing bolted back down and try and fire it up and see if it's going to run. At the end of the video here, you'll just see me messing around with the carb adjustment screws a little bit, trying to get it close. So that's all I'm going to have for you on the Husqvarna 128LD string trimmer carb refresh. Thanks for watching. Later.